Hey, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Pesachim, 1 week at a time. This is very exciting. We are on the sixth lesson of Pesachim. We are really getting into the Masechet, and we're going to review Daf 32 Lamed Bet till 38. Lamed Chet. If everyone can just mute themselves, just so we don't have any feedback. Again, if anybody has any questions, you're invited to ask questions or make comments in the chat. I try to read it as you're typing, so feel free to discuss in there, and then I will try to read out the questions as we're learning or at the end. So again, welcome everyone. And this week I have a number of pictures from a website called Daf HaChaim. I definitely suggest looking at it. He has very nice graphics. So we'll see. A lot of them are in Hebrew, so I'm trying to be selective. So those of you who are less comfortable with reading Hebrew, I'm trying to find slides that have Hebrew and English. So we will see some of those slides as we start learning. Okay, let's begin. If you remember, last week we did have so many things to discuss that I actually did not do the last Mishnah on the page. So we're actually going to talk about the last Mishnah on 31 Amud Bet, meaning the last daf that we did last week. And the Mishnah over there describes a case where a zar means a person who is not a Kohen. So the non-Kohen person eats chametz on Pesach, but the chametz is actually truma, meaning truma is a gift that we give to the Kohanim, to the priests. It is not allowed to be eaten by someone who is not a priest, who is not a Kohen. So basically what this person just did is basically transgressed two issues. One is chametz on Pesach. The other is eating truma. So what happens when we do two wrong things? Two wrongs do not make a right here. And the question is, what is the consequence? So the Mishnah says that he needs, again, if he does this by accident, he didn't mean to do it, it wasn't purposeful, then he needs to pay back the Kohen the principal value of what he ate plus a fifth. Meaning this is the punishment or the consequence of eating truma, meaning it's basically stealing from the Kohen, from the priest, and therefore you need to pay him back. If you do it on purpose, then you are actually liable for death. The punishment is death. We'll talk about that in a little bit. There is a concept in the Gemara, I think we've mentioned it before, even last week, if not 2 weeks ago. In Hebrew, the concept is called, in Aramaic, it's kimle bidiraba mine, which means basically if you are liable to get two punishments, one monetary and one capital, you get the capital punishment and you do not needed to pay the financial fine. So with this as well, if you ate this truma, which is chametz on Pesach, you are liable for death because of eating chametz, and therefore you do not have to pay the monetary fine for truma. Okay, we are now at the top of 32. Again, that was 31. We're now at the top of 32. And the question is, in general, when you need to pay back something, let's say something was stolen and you need to pay it back, the question in the Gemara is, do you pay back based on volume or based on value? Wait, I forgot to show you this slide. So this is the slide again from Daf HaChaim, and here it says again. The Mishnah says, I'll translate. Right, if someone eats truma that is chametz on Pesach, again, if he does it inadvertently, he needs to pay the full value plus a fifth, which is really a quarter, but that's another conversation. Here, a fifth of the total to the Kohen. Again, he took it from the Kohen. If he does it b'mezid, knowingly, he does not pay because he will be liable for death. Okay, so now the Gemara says, well, first of all, do you pay based on the volume of what you just ate or on the value? And this is very important when we're talking about chametz on Pesach, because again, volume it definitely had, but value, chametz is actually does not have value according to most opinions on Pesach, and therefore, so first the Gemara says that if a thief does steal something, he pays back from the value of that object at the time of the theft. Meaning, again, if the value goes up or down, we look at the time of theft. Then the question, of course, is what happens if the value goes up? Do you now pay the current value or the original value? But again, as I mentioned, and that's something we'll talk about in another Masechet, but right now what we want to understand is on Pesach, chametz does not have any value. So if you ate this truma on Pesach, maybe you don't have to pay the Kohen anything because it is worthless. Again, we don't ask this according to Rabbi Yossi Haglili because he says that you can get benefit, meaning there is a value to chametz on Pesach, and therefore that's not a question according to him. Some say that you don't pay again because the chametz is worthless on Pesach. Others say you pay based on the value that it will have after Pesach. Again, after Pesach, it will have value. Sarah, excellent question. That's why I said it's a little complicated. Basically, it is 25%, but it is also a fifth because the Gemara explains it's a fifth of the total price after you add what you just paid. So it's called a chomesh, but a fifth, but really it's 25%, meaning you take the value that it is now, you give 25% more, but if you add that to the total value, it is really considered a fifth. If that was not clear, I'll try to explain it another time. But yes, it's called basically a fifth of the total, like at the end, as opposed to from the way we normally think of a fifth. But yes, excellent question. Okay, the Gemara says also it depends when you separated the truma. So if you separated the truma before Pesach, so then this works because it was truma and then it became chametz. But if you separated it on a Pesach, then it is more. It doesn't take effect, and therefore it's not really truma. And if he ate it, he doesn't pay because it doesn't become kadosh. Now we have a discussion about the truma. Again, truma being the gift that we give to the priests, to the kohanim. What if it becomes tameh? Right. So if it's tameh, you can't eat it, but you can burn it and get benefit from it. But not chametz on Pesach. Or maybe you can get benefit from it. Maybe you can feed it to a dog, or again, as I mentioned, maybe you can burn it. Then we talk about what is the amount that this person ate. Right, a kazait, again, the amount, the volume of an olive, and then you would have to pay, again, the principal plus a fifth. Abba Shaul says, no, we actually look at not the volume, but the value, meaning the value of what he ate. If it is if it is valued at a pruta was the smallest denomination of coin in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, right? So we would say, either a penny or a nickel, like this, the smallest, I guess, significant coin, and therefore it goes by value, right? So again, we're trying to understand: is it by value or by volume? The Gemara then says, well, if he ate less than a kazait, right, a smaller amount, but it was worth a pruta, so then he pays the principal, but he doesn't add that fifth. So maybe there's, that difference. Abba Shul says no. You have to pay both because it was the value, meaning it was valued at a pruta, which is significant. Or he says, no, you need both, meaning it needs to be a kazait, the size of an egg, and it needs to be valued at least a pruta. And then we said, no, that's not his opinion. It's only one value and not both of them. Okay, again, as I mentioned, we have the concept of kimle. Again, you're saying the volume is low? Let me see. Hold on. Hold on. 1 minute, please. Oh, you can hear it? Okay. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Is that better? Can you hear it a little bit better? Okay. Okay, great. Okay, let's go on to me'ilah. Me'ilah, we've mentioned before, is when you appropriate, when you use something that is meant to be sanctified, that is kadosh. Basically, it's like stealing from God. This only works if it's inadvertent, if you did it b'shogeg, but not if you do it on purpose, b'mezid. And here, the Gemara says that when you do me'ilah, the punishment is what's called in Hebrew mita bidei shamayim, meaning God will, strike you down, right? You deserve death, but it's not in a court, but God will take care of it. And then there's an interesting conversation in the Gemara. What is more stringent, the punishment of karet or mita? Mita is, again, God is, you're going to die, but God is going to take care of it. Karet is where you are going to be cut off. It definitely seems to be much more stringent, but the Gemara has that conversation of, first the Gemara says karet is more stringent, then it says no, mita is worse, but again, that is the conversation at the bottom of 32. Okay, we're now at the top of 33, Lamed Gimel, where we have a machloket, a disagreement about what is the punishment for me'ilah. Again, using something that belongs to God, that is sanctified. So Rebbe says that if you do it on purpose, you would get mita, as I mentioned before. I would say like divine death penalty. Chachamim say no, it's what's called a lav. It is a negative commandment. You did the wrong thing, but you're not going to get killed for it. So it seems like Me'ilah and Truma are parallel because both of them have this divine capital punishment for a kazait, right, for a small amount. And then the Gemara says no, Me'ilah is different because for other transgressions, if you didn't have intent, and we have spoken about this before in terms of the importance of intent, if you don't have intent, you're not liable. As we know, that's the general rule. But for Me'ilah, again, if you use something that has been sanctified, then even if you don't have intent, you're still liable. So we see on 33, Me'ilah is more stringent than than Truma or other things that we have been discussing. And since we're talking about doing things either knowingly or inadvertently, right, b'shogeg and b'mezid, the Gemara adds a third term, which is mit'asek. Mit'asek means that I intended to do a permitted action, but I ended up transgressing, meaning let's say I intended, let's say I go, I don't know why you would do this, but I go out to my garden and I have a vegetable patch, and before Shabbat I picked a tomato and I left it on the ground. On Shabbat I go to pick up that tomato, but instead of picking up the tomato that was on the ground, I end up plucking off a tomato that was attached to the ground. That is what's called mit'asek. And again here, because you had good intentions, but you ended up doing the wrong thing, what happens, right? And the Gemara says that specifically for me'ilah, again, for taking something that is sanctified for your own use, you're even chayiv for mit'asek, meaning you totally had good intentions, but the result was negative, so you are still liable. Okay. One second. Okay. What about, the Gemara now continues and talks about separating truma that can't be eaten, right? So like we talked about on Pesach, separating the truma, but if you can't eat it, does that work? Because the Torah says that it says titen lo. When you separate the truma, you need to give it to him, meaning you need to give it to the Kohen so that he can use it. If he can't use it, so then maybe that separation does not work. So the Gemara says you shouldn't separate, let's say, tameh truma, because tameh truma can't be eaten, so then don't separate it, right? Because he can't eat it, then it's better not to separate it. If you did it b'shogeg, again, inadvertently, so then it's okay, but better not to. And since we're talking about tameh truma, again, truma, the gift that you gave to the Kohen, needs to be eaten with purity. What if it became impure? So now you can't eat it. So because it had a point where it was permitted, maybe it's okay, but now it's chametz. Again, our original case about truma, that's chametz, and it was eaten on Pesach. And then versus, okay, so now let's see, right? So truma needs to be what's called like the first, meaning therefore you separate the truma and everything else now is permissible to be eaten. So now the Gemara actually says if that's the case that it needs to be the first, therefore we're going to imply from here that it needs to be, the rest of it needs to be eaten by a non-Kohen, right? A non-priest. And that is a problem on Pesach. Again, if we're talking about it being chametz, so now if I separate it on Pesach, not only can the Kohen not eat it, but the Yisrael also can't eat it. Nobody can eat it because it's chametz. So that is that discussion. From here, we move on to an interesting discussion about the fruit of the juice of a fruit. And interestingly, the fruit you can see here in the picture, the fruit. Let's say we're talking about grapes, and let's say the grape becomes tameh, right? It becomes impure. Does the grape juice, right, that comes out of the grape, is it tameh or tahor, right? Is it impure like the fruit that it just came out of, or is it pure because we'll see. Okay, so that's going to be our question. So the Gemara says we have tameh grapes, and you can squeeze them if you take less than an egg volume. That's why there's an egg here, right? Less than an egg volume of the grapes. If you take that small volume and you squeeze it out, then the juice that comes out, or the wine that comes out, is pure. That is the first opinion. That is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that the juice of a fruit, in Hebrew he says is miskad pkide, meaning it's separate, right? You have like the fruit, and then there's juice also, right? It's separate from the fruit, even though it's within the skin or the peel. But the next opinion, Rav Chisda says no. Rav Chisda says nivla blie. The juice is actually balua. It is soaked up in the fruit, and it is all one unit. And therefore, if the fruit is impure, is tameh, so too the juice that comes out of it is also considered impure, meaning it doesn't matter how much a fruit you squeeze, if you do it less than the appropriate volume or more, either way, it is still going to be tameh. From here we get into a concept called takala. We did have this either last week or the week before, which is we're going to be concerned that you might inadvertently transgress, meaning we're concerned, I'm not going to let you squeeze the fruit in order to get the juice out of it, because I'm afraid that maybe you'll eat the truma that is tameh, right? Again, you're not allowed to eat impure truma, so I'm not going to let you keep it around, lest you end up coming to eat it by accident, which is a severe problem. The Gemara gives us some solutions to takala, to making sure that we don't get in trouble. So one solution is you take this tameh truma, the truma that is impure, and you put it in a disgusting container, right? And therefore I know you're not going to drink it or eat it because it's not appetizing, and therefore you won't come to eat it, and therefore you can store it. Okay, from here we're moving on to 34, Lamed Dalid, and we're going to talk about more truma that became tameh, that became impure. So Abba Shaul, I have to say, I love when we get little snippets of the sages' lives. Like, what were their lives like? What were they doing when they weren't in the study hall, in the Beit Midrash? So here we have a story that Abba Shaul says he was the kneader, he was the baker in Rebbe's house, in Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's house, and he would use wheat that became impure, and this wheat was truma, and he would use it to heat up the water for tahor, for pure dough. And he says, again, you might have thought that I should be concerned using something impure for something that is pure. And he says, no, I cooked it first, and then I made it repulsive to make sure that nobody's going to eat it, and then it's okay. So we see that there is a way around using this impure truma. From here we have another way of getting around truma that has become tameh. Again, truma being the gift that was given to the kohanim, to the priests. What if you planted them? So like you took something that became tameh, impure, you planted it in the ground. When the new thing grows, it is now considered pure, meaning because it changed its form and became something else, it becomes pure. Though the Gemara says it still can't be eaten, either for a non-Kohen, because again, don't forget, it's still truma, or maybe we're talking about if you then take that thing and you plant it. Maybe that's what we're talking about. Or maybe it's you're not allowed to eat it because now we get to a new concept, which is called hesech da'at. Hesech da'at is like consciousness or awareness. Hesech means to remove awareness. Meaning, if I am not guarding something or I'm not watching something, so then I don't know if it's pure or impure. So the Gemara says maybe the issue here is when I planted it, I don't know if it became pure or impure, and maybe that's why you can't eat it. Rabbi Yochanan says, let's discuss this concept of hesech da'at, meaning it's like a lapse of intention. And the question is, what's the issue? Is it really physically problematic or more conceptually problematic? So Rabbi Yochanan says it's more conceptual, and because there was a lapse in attention, it might have become impure. Therefore, I'm going to say it's not invalidated, but right, it's still considered truma, but I see it as impure because I don't know what happened to it. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, no, it actually is invalidated. It's actually not even truma anymore because I didn't have attention on it. I wasn't focusing on it. And therefore, it is not considered truma even. Interestingly enough, they talk about this concept being reversible by Eliyahu, by Elijah, the prophet, who is said to going to come when the Messiah comes. He's going to go around, and anything that we're not sure about, he's going to tell us what is the real law. So the Gemara, interestingly enough, says that according to Rabbi Yochanan, when it's more conceptual, that's something that Eliyahu Hanavi can kind of fix or change for us. But according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, if it's a physical issue, that Eliyahu Hanavi cannot change. It is not reversible. Okay. All right. Let's keep going. The Gemara talks about different cases of things that are disqualified, and the Gemara wants to see, is it disqualified again physically or more conceptually? So it talks about bird offerings that became disqualified, and they describe how they would put it in a place between the ramp and the altar, and they would leave it there overnight. And this way it would become physically disqualified, and then they would burn it. So we see that the original disqualification was more conceptual, and later on they would actually have to physically disqualify it in order to burn it. Okay, from here we get into a discussion about the stringencies of things that are sanctified, things that are kadosh. And even if, according to the letter of the law, we can behave in one way, the Gemara talks about how the rabbis were more stringent because we're talking about things that are sanctified. And when they are sanctified, we need to be more careful. So the first thing that they mention, the first example, are the waters that were poured on the altar during Sukkot. Mei HaChag, the water of Sukkot. We have mentioned this before, that over Sukkot, they had what was called Simchat Beit HaShoeva, a big festival every night where they would bring water from the spring and they would pour it on the altar. So the question is, what happens if this water became tameh? So they say that you can touch it to, it became impure. What can you do? You take it and you touch it to pure water, and that is okay, and that makes it pure. But the Gemara says this is only before you sanctified the water. But if you sanctified the water, then it wouldn't work. I see a question. Wasn't it said that decay was something that miraculously did not happen near the altar? Yes, Lynn. In general, the things in the temple did not decay. However, things, if they were left overnight, because again, the temple was really not in use overnight. There weren't really sacrifices. There were things that were burnt overnight, but otherwise, they basically locked the doors and there wasn't work being done at night in the temple. And I think that's what it's talking about. Meaning here, things that are decaying here are things that are left overnight, and they're specifically to decay. Interestingly enough, it's interesting that you mention it. There is one opinion that it's not that it would decay exactly because of what you just said, that don't we say that there's no decay in the temple? And the other opinion is that it becomes disqualified not because it decayed, but because it was there overnight. Meaning sacrifices needed to be dealt with right away. If you left them overnight, they're called notar. Notar means leftover, right, overnight, and then it becomes disqualified. Again, sometimes it's one night, 2 nights. So yes, that is an important point that you bring up. Thank you. Okay, we're talking about stringencies of things that are sanctified. So we mentioned the water that was poured on the mizbeach, on the altar for Sukkot. The next thing is, again, making wine for the temple. So if you, again, squeezed grapes that were impure and then you sanctified it, then it could, the wine that came out could be considered pure. But maybe it depends on the amount that we're squeezing, again, as we mentioned before, or maybe it depends on the level of impurity that the fruit initially has. And the Gemara talks about a distinction between sanctifying something verbally, right? Again, one has the ability to sanctify something even just by saying, Harei zeh kadosh, or, behold, this should be for the temple, or sanctified, or, right, that is one level of sanctification. Or if you put something into a sanctified vessel, a kli, that would be a different level of sanctification, of kedusha. Okay, the third example is when they made the water to sprinkle on someone who was impure. It's called mei chatat. It was water, and they mixed into it the ashes from the red heifer, from the para aduma. I think we mentioned it last week. So it says that you should put the ashes into the vessel that was used to draw the water from the river. Even though the Gemara says that that's just a stringency. Really, you should be able to use, put it into any vessel. It doesn't have to be the original vessel that was used. Okay. From here, we're moving on to Daf 35, and we are moving on to, I think, more practical discussions in the Gemara, some fundamentals that will help us for Pesach, Be'ezrat Hashem, when we get to Pesach soon. Well, not so soon, but sorry, okay. Thought I needed to sneeze. The Mishnah talks about what we are allowed to make matzah out of. So the Gemara says that there are 5 grains that we can use for matzah. Here it's in Hebrew, but I'll translate, going from right to left. So chitim, wheat, barley, spelt, kusmin is spelt, chiffon is rye, and shibolet shual is oats, are oats. And the Gemara is going to explain each one. But as you can see, all of these grains are able to make matzah. The Gemara then goes into a list of other things that you can use for matzah. You can use dmai, something if you're not sure if it was tithed or not. if Maaser was taken, or Maaser Rishon, when they took already Truma from it. We're going to explain all of these things. Or Maaser Sheni, or something that was sanctified and it was redeemed. If any of you have been doing Daf Yomi since we started in January, then this discussion should sound familiar. I think this is at least the third, if not fourth time we're seeing this discussion, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So the Gemara talks about a category of things that can be used for matzah, and then it has a category of things that can't be used. You cannot use tevel. Again, tevel is grain where you didn't separate any of the gifts to the priests or to the Levi'im. Again, Maaser Rishon, when you didn't take off Truma, Maaser Sheni, and Hekdesh, again, things that are sanctified, that weren't redeemed. Then the last line of the Mishnah says that you can't use the loaves of bread, the loaves that were used for the thanks offering, the Korban Todah. It was brought with 40 loaves of bread, 30 of which were matzah, meaning they were not chametz. The Gemara says that if you baked these loaves for yourself, for private use, then you cannot use them for matzah. But if you made them to sell, then you can use them, and we'll talk about that in towards the end of today's class. Okay, so now the Gemara says, okay, you told me about the 5 grains. What's it coming to exclude? So it's excluding rice or millet. These are things, the Gemara says that matzah is intrinsically connected to chametz. Things that are, that can be leavened, right, that can rise, are things that you're allowed to make into matzah. And if not, then not. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says rice is actually a grain and it can be chametz, and therefore he says you can make rice matzah. We do not say, like, the practical law is that we say that you cannot do that. The Gemara says that these things are karov lehachmitz. They're close to leavening. The Gemara says, what does that mean, close? Meaning they're better, they leaven faster, or they're similar to, but not chametz. And that is the question. From here we get into a fascinating discussion about what we call in Hebrew or in Israel, matzah ashira. Wealthy matzah. In America we call it egg matzah. This is matzah that's made, again, in our times it's made with eggs. In the time of the Gemara, it talks about matzah that was made, that the dough was kneaded with wine, oil, or honey. And the question is, can this be considered matzah or not? I think many of us grew up and people ate egg matzah on Pesach. Nowadays, I think it's a little bit more complicated. Not everybody agrees that you can eat it on Pesach. Some people say maybe older people can eat it, maybe just children can eat it. It's not chametz, but it's a little complicated, and therefore the Gemara says, what's the issue? Again, the idea that only things that are matzah can be considered chametz. And what is this? And the concept of, and we'll talk more about this in a second, is matzah is also called lechem oni. Lechem oni means, again, we'll see what it means, but the simple understanding, right, we say it's the bread of affliction, or it's poor man's bread. So then, if I have rich man's bread, how could that be poor man's bread? And therefore, one opinion is that you cannot use this dough to make matzah because it's too rich. and it's supposed to be poor. I think there are a lot of lessons in that. Okay. Okay, one second. Okay. Then the Gemara says again, fruit juice. What about adding fruit juice to your dough to make matzah? You might think that it would make it chametz. The Gemara says no, it does not make it chametz. And therefore, again, matzah ashira or egg matzahs are not considered chametz. The question really just is if it can be used, for matzah or not. And now, as I mentioned before, this sugya, this discussion that we're going to have right now is a discussion that we have seen before. We saw it in Eruvin, we saw it in Shabbat, and we saw it in Brachot. And it is, again, the things that we are allowed to use. Again, here it's for matzah. In Brachot, it was, if you eat these things, do you say Birkat HaMazon? And basically for each category, the Gemara says, isn't it obvious? And then the Gemara says, no, there's a specific reason. 1 second, Lynn just wrote, rich matzah is more flavorful, but I know how there is an opinion that on Pesach is not demanding mourning or sadness, i.e. clean, but this makes sense. Yes, we're going to get to mourning and sadness in a little bit. Let's just do this idea, and we'll talk about that in a second. So again, you can use dmai, something where we're not sure if the gifts were given yet. The Gemara says it's okay because poor people can eat it. Therefore, you can use dmai and make it into matzah. What about Maaser Rishon? Again, that it was given to the Levi, to the Levite. He got it before you separated the gifts for the priest, for the Kohen, the Truma. The Levi needs to give his own gift to the Kohen, but the farmer doesn't have to give the gift to the Kohen anymore. Because he basically messed up the order in which to give the gifts. And either way, you can use it for matzah. What about Maaser Sheni? Again, Maaser Sheni is a tithe that you put aside that you need to eat in Jerusalem. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And something Hekdesh that was sanctified. The Gemara says that as long as they were redeemed, it's okay. Even if they were only redeemed with the principal and not with the extra fifth, it's still considered redeemed and you can make it into matzah. But Tevel, something that you did not separate any gifts to the Kohen yet for, that is, cannot be used for matzah. And again, Maaser Rishon, that you didn't give Truma, again, cannot be used. Neither can Maaser Sheni, that was not redeemed. Again, they were redeemed in the wrong way. For here, we get into a discussion. It's a little bit complicated. Wait, hold on. That talks about, again, we say that matzah can only be made from a grain that has the potential to become chametz, right? Again, there's that intrinsic connection between chametz and matzah. So now the Gemara asks, it says that you can't make matzah out of partial tevel, right? Again, if it was slightly, if it was tevel, again, you didn't separate any gifts yet. Like if you took the truma from it, but you didn't take out the truma maaser, right? Meaning you gave one gift, but not the other gift. And what about, right? So then the Gemara says, but it's also chametz and it's asur, meaning I can't eat it because it's chametz and because it's tevel, meaning I can't eat food that you didn't give the gift to the Kohen yet. And now we have this concept, which is ein isur chal al isur, meaning there is a concept that, and the question is, does it apply or not? Let's say something is forbidden to eat. Now, is there a concept of it becoming more forbidden for another reason? So, ein isur chal al isur means, no, once something is forbidden, it's forbidden. You can't there's no double forbidden. And therefore, we say, right, Rabbi Shimon says, that it doesn't matter the second time. One is enough. Rav Sheshet says, right, that it doesn't take effect. It's only one isur. And then Chachamim say, again, the sages say, no, you could have two isurim, two prohibitions. Right here at the bottom, right, they agree that tevel grain cannot be used for matzah because the grain was used for matzah, should not have any other isur, meaning one thing, it could be chametz, but not tevel. That's already too much. And we are now on daf 36. And we're going to talk about Maser Sheni. Again, Maser Sheni was a tithe that you separated, and what happens is you take that food, you take it to Jerusalem, and then you eat it in Jerusalem. Another option, let's say it's going to get spoiled and you don't have any plans to travel to Jerusalem, you can redeem it onto money and then take the money to Jerusalem and then go to your favorite falafel stand and buy some falafel and eat it in Jerusalem. So the question is, first the question is, can I use Maaser Sheni in Jerusalem as matzah? Okay, again, let's say I have wheat and I separated it and now it's Maaser Sheni. I take the wheat up to Jerusalem. Can I use that wheat and make it into matzah? Now we get into the discussion about lechem oni. Again, as we mentioned, it needs to be lechem oni. Now the question is, how do I read that word? Again, oni can be written two ways. One is with a vav, which is called maleh, right? Full, oni, or it can be written without a vav. If it's written without a vav, then I could pronounce it ani, like a poor person, as opposed to oni, which means affliction. Here the Gemara really discusses, what does that mean? Right? Is it that it needs to be oni, again, the bread of affliction, but here from the word an onen is a person who lost a relative today, even before the funeral, right? He's called a mourner after the funeral, an avel. Before the funeral, he's called an onen. That's that oni. So the question is, again, Maaser Sheni is forbidden for an onen to eat, and therefore maybe, again, since matzah has to be lechem oni, the bread of affliction, maybe therefore it cannot be made out of Maaser Sheni. And Rabbi Akiva says, no, I learned something else from oni, that it needs to be, again, remember as I said, lechem ani, as in poor, it needs to be poor man's bread and not rich bread made out of wine or oil or eggs. And here really, as you see on the slide, it says written versus read, right? Do we go according to how it's written in the Torah, or do we go according to the way we read it? And that really is the discussion. And therefore, again, it could be seen either way, right? The bread of affliction, oni, or poor man's bread or poor bread, lechem ani, right? Poor. So I thought that was, again, a fascinating discussion. Another option for oni is onim. It is bread that you say a lot of things over it. Right? We say Hallel, we say the Haggadah, and therefore, it is also a description of the matzah. Yes, correct, Sarah. There are no vowels in the Torah, and therefore we look at how it's written, but we have a tradition on how it is read. So the question is, do you go according to what we see in the Bible, like in the Torah, or by the oral tradition on how we read it? Excellent comment. Yes, thank you. Okay. All right. The Gemara says, right, maybe there's a distinction between the first night versus the rest of Pesach. Again, as we know, there is a special mitzvah, a special commandment to eat matzah on the first night, and then for the other days, it's a little bit of a different level of eating. What about making your matzah with warm water? The Gemara says that in the temple that was okay, because again, the Kohanim are zrizim. The priests were very careful, very conscious of all the laws. But when people make matzah, maybe they won't be as conscientious, as careful, and therefore they shouldn't use hot water or warm water. Again, the idea that if the water is warm, it might increase the leavening factor and it might become chametz. Or maybe it's talking about the place where people are zrizin, meaning the temple. So if you do it at the temple, you're being washed and it's okay. But at home, no. From here, the Gemara discusses making matzah out of bikurim, right? So we talked about making matzah out of maaser sheni. Now bikurim. Bikurim are the first fruits that are meant to be brought to the temple, generally during the festival, the holiday of Shavuot. Again, one of those fruits is wheat, a grain. What about using that grain to make matzah? So the Gemara introduces this concept that it says in the Torah, Bechol moshvotechem. You need to be able to eat the matzah wherever you are, meaning anywhere in Israel, not only in the temple. The problem is that bikurim can only be eaten in Jerusalem, and therefore, therefore you cannot. Maybe you cannot use bikurim to make matzah. And again, we have the idea of lechem oni. Bikurim is a celebration of all your produce. You're a farmer. You're so successful. That is the opposite of the idea of the bread of affliction or of a poor person. And from here we get to this idea on 37, which is, you can make matzah out of white flour, out of whole grain flour, and what about making it like a thick loaf? Beit Shammai says no. Beit Hillel say it's okay, but only up to a tefach, only a certain amount, and he bases this on the bread that they made in the mikdash, in the temple. Then it talks about what about matzah? Interestingly enough, apparently they made matzahs in different either shapes or with decorations on them. Here there's a discussion, can you do this for matzah for Pesach? Again, the difficulty is that if you spend too much time decorating it, it's going to become chametz. It's going to become leaven. And therefore, you have to be very careful. Maybe only the professionals can do it, or maybe the professionals do it so intricately that no, maybe only the home baker can do it. We have both opinions. From here, we have a discussion about how you're baking your matzah or your challah. Well, we'll talk about, from here, actually, we start talking about the concept of taking challah. Again, if you're making, and don't get confused with the word challah when we're making matzah, but the commandment or the mitzvah of challah is when I make a dough that is going to be bread, and if I have a certain amount of flour, then I need to separate what's called challah. Challah is, here in this sense, is not the loaf that you eat on Shabbat, but it is the gift that is given to the priest, to the Kohen, every time I make bread, when I make it in a large quantity. And here we're going to equate something that can be taken challah out of, meaning it makes it dough like bread, and therefore it could also be used for matzah. So that's the connection. Again, don't get confused with the word challah and matzah, right? If you're making matzah and you make a big dough, you have to separate challah from your matzah dough. So that's just a little, not to get confused. But the Gemara talks about a differentiation between how you're baking it. In general, bread is baked. If you fry it, there's a discussion on whether or not you need to take off challah, right? And interesting, here you have sufganin. It reminds us of our sufganiyot that we just had on Chanukah. Those are, again, mizonot. They're not hamotzi, maybe primarily because they're being fried. From here, the Gemara talks about these two concepts of me'isa and chalita. If any of you are bakers, maybe, I don't know the difference in terms of practicality, but if I take water and I take boiling water and flour, basically the two differences are the order, right? The difference is the order, right? Do I pour boiling water over the flour, or do I pour the flour over the boiling water? I don't understand the difference, or what that dough is going to be like. But there is a discussion on if you need to take challah from this kind of dough. And again, goes back to the idea that if it's fried, you don't have to take challah. If it's baked, then you do. And from here at the bottom of 37 to the top of 39, we're going to talk again back to Maaser Sheni. The question is, who owns Maaser Sheni? On one hand, it's sanctified, and then maybe it is divinely owned. Or on the other hand, I get to eat it. So maybe I own it. The practical implication is, can I use it for matzah? So the Gemara says, that, according to the person who says that God owns it, so then you don't have to take challah and you can't make it into matzah. But the sages say you do own it, and therefore you have to take challah and you can use it for matzah. The Gemara continues and talks about why it's important for the matzah to be ours. Again, it is connected to challah. Challah needs to be taken off of dough that is mine, and that's called lechem. And again, matzah is lechem oni, and therefore it is comparable, and they both need to be privately owned. From here, the Gemara does, I just want to end with another concept that we have in the Gemara. There is a new concept called ho'il. Ho'il means since, meaning the question is, I'm talking about something where it is right now, but since it could have been X, and that would have been permitted, then maybe, yes, whereas, that's good, but maybe then now, even though it's at a different stage, maybe it would still be permitted, right? So the Gemara talks about, again, as I mentioned, matzah needs to be eaten anywhere in the country. Maaser Sheni can only be eaten in Jerusalem. However, if Maaser Sheni became impure, became tameh, you could redeem it and eat it anywhere. Therefore, because it has this ability to be eaten anywhere, even though right now I can't eat it anywhere, maybe I can make it into matzah. So that's the ho'il, and the Gemara says you can use ho'il once, but not twice. right? Only one time, but not like doubly removed. The Gemara then mentions this idea that I mentioned before about using the loaves that are either for the Todah offering, the thankfulness offering, or the loaves that were used when a Nazir came to bring his korban. And the Gemara says that, again, if it was privately owned, if you made it for yourself, you can't use it. Because again, you made it specifically for this sacrifice. But if you made it to sell, most people will have in mind that they will, if I'm going to take it to sell, whatever I don't sell, then I will be able to use it, or I'll eat the leftovers. And then you can use that for matzah. Whew. Okay, wait, I just saw that there was a comment. Any cookie cutter implement could catch dough and create chametz to the next piece. Another good reason not to make shaped matzahs beyond just touching it too long. Excellent. So Lynn, the Gemara does talk about making some sort of like cookie cutter. Interestingly, I think, at least from my like sense, is when it was like a stamp or a cookie cutter, maybe it was like hollow and therefore things wouldn't wouldn't touch it, or maybe you'd have to be very careful, but you're right. Either way, the Gemara says you should not do this, again, lest it become chametz. So with that, again, a lot of information. I thank you for your patience, and looking forward to learning with you next week as well.